Thank you very much for the chance to talk here. I'm actually presenting my bachelor's thesis, but this is my second thesis, and it was made with my master's program in mind, so it might be a little complicated sometimes, but I'll try to make it quick. So my paper explores specific forms of playbor that can be found in a typical free-to-play game. The urgency of this study is due to the booming market of such games and also their very successful capitalization. I think you know the story, you know how much money you need to buy a company like King, and it happens. And what's even more important for my own, for the purpose of my studies, is that World of Warcraft is one of kind of textbook examples of playbor. You all know this story of Chinese gold farmers and a lot of literature and criticism of this story. Of course, games of King are also being criticized as free-to-play games, and you can actually find quite a lot of playbor in them. So these two games, which are very different, now belong to the same publisher, and it might be a good time to reflect on it and what to do with that and how to live with it. So I argue that free-to-play games are a new landmark in digital economies. They make their players productive in a new, previously unexploited ways. A paradoxical statement I'd like to make is that only paying users can really enjoy the game for free. Because players who choose not to pay, they are obliged to return the favor, to return it by playing laboriously, by doing mundane actions in the game that are not actually fun, but they create some value for the publisher. And based on that, my research question is, how can we conceptualize economic relationships in a free-to-play game as playbor? I'm answering it by a close study of a typical farming game called Royal Story. It's just a normal farming game like Farmville, but a little bit much more complicated. And I try to answer it. My research objective is to discover design patterns when play becomes work and work becomes play. And the game offers a really broad perspective for it because it's really complicated. It has thousands of unique objects, a dozen of in-game currencies. Most games go pretty well with 2 currencies, but Royal Story has 11 to 15 of currencies. And of course, many in-game quests. And this is quite an uncommon subject for game studies. Of course, there are plenty of critical articles that accuse free-to-play games of exploiting their players, but only a few of them are empirically grounded. So sometimes it's not enough just to make a claim. Sometimes you have to prove your claim, and that's what I was trying to do by combining critical and understanding approaches to learn about players' motivation, both extrinsic and intrinsic. It means what game developers tell them to do and what players actually will do and what they actually do. To understand that, I used a hybrid methodology of Mio Consalvo and Jensen Beggy. I think you know they have this amazing book called Players and Their Pets on the game faunosphere, which is technically not a farm, but it was kind of very similar in terms of game mechanics, and it's a very nice academic study. I can totally recommend it if you are researching casual games. So, I base my theoretical part of my thesis on works of all these authors of this digital labor textbook compiled by Trebor Scholz. So there will be Trebor Scholz, there will be, of course, Christian Fuchs and Tiziana Terranova and all this Italian school of critical studies of labor and of digital labor. Finally, I start from the definition of playbor, and I start from the first definition coined by Julian Kuklish, and then I go through all its history to today's publications of Christian Fuchs, who already introduces this word playbor into his vocabulary of terms that we need to study and analyze digital labor in the modern world in 2014. And in his later books as well. So, to work with that further, I need my own definition, and for the sake of my studies, okay, sorry, it was my literature review. It's kind of big. Okay, we will come back to it later. And my definition, my working definition, this is important. Like, it's not like any playbor can be defined like that, but for the sake of my studies, which are more economic, playbor, so playbor is a rewarded activity that creates value in the world of in the environment of a digital game. So there are two things really important for that: the reward, which is extrinsic, it's given by the developer, and the value, which is also extrinsic, it's exchangeable value. It's something that brings profit to a developer, for example, or in case of peer-to-peer economies in other digital games, that would be a value created for other players. Actually, we have some of that in our case, but we will not talk about it really much, because we don't have time. So I started with the assumption that playbor, just like labor, as understood by Christian Fuchs and other theoretics of all that huge post-Marxism field, playbor is based on quantified time. And the farming game seemed like a very nice example for that, because there is like this typical mechanic of a farming game when you click on things and wait, you click and wait, and this graphic, it was a part of my study. It shows how much time you should wait to grow certain amounts of crops, and like it can be from 30 seconds to 24 hours. Here we only have 20 hours, 24 hours, okay, it's another game. So, and it seemed like players justify their work for them, like their farming work for them, by the time they spend on growing that crops. And it looks just like the normal labor theory of value that Marx introduced, and it's been criticized, and rightfully actually. But I started with that assumption, and then I dug a little deeper into how time is structured in a farming game. I came to the following conclusions. Firstly, to work for playbor to become possible in a game, time must be synchronized with real time. Ludic time must be synchronized with real time. So play hours actually become working hours. Secondly, the reward should be based on and measured in time, because sometimes there are no other ways to measure how much the player has worked. So it's basically in hours. It's it's time-based wage. And finally, the third important quality of such games is interruptibility, and it's not like they can be interrupted. It's different. They should be interrupted. The player should go in and out of the game, in and out, and it also structures his or her time in a way that makes player possible. So, my initial analysis of several game quests shows direct correlation between players' time and cost of game objects. Like in this table, actually, it's not really seen, but yes, the more you work, the less, well, the more you work, the more valuable reward you get for that. But then, also, selling value of virtual goods was quite logically the bigger, the more time was spent. But anyway, the purchase price of goods was most likely demand-based, especially for rare animals and decorations, for so-called vanity objects. And this price was comparatively high. It was not time-based, it was not labor-based, it was basically auction-based or demand-based. And then I started to explore how players value their rewards. Some of them are expensive, some of them are bought for real money, some of them are earned in many, many hours of grinding or of clicking, of whatever. So my method was, I observed about 70 dedicated players and how they spatially organized their farms. My assumption was they would put most valuable items in the center, because the center of the farm, this is what you see when you visit your neighbor's farm. So I assumed if there's are vanity objects, if they are important, they would put them in the center. And I proved to be wrong, actually, because when I started like measuring that and putting that into the table and everything, it appeared that most of these 60 players, they would just treat these objects however they would like. They would assign totally personal values to them. And even if the object took really a lot of time to achieve, like in a seasonal quest, so like there are a lot of seasonal quests with very expensive purchases, and players actually did buy these expensive trees for real money just because they wanted to, because they were like, they treated them as luxury products, basically. So the quest is really laborious. It requires 2 weeks of daily work for several hours, because you have to log into game for many, many times. And in the end, you get, in this quest, you get a monkey, but most players just would put it with other monkeys somewhere at the periphery of their farm and put newly bought trees in the middle of their farm because they like them, they're beautiful, they don't care how much value the game developer put into them. And there was another quest that was even more laborious, and it also had these beautiful, beautiful prizes, like these beautiful birds. And it appeared that like only 20 players out of 60 actually claimed this final prize, these beautiful birds, just married owls, and only 10 of them put them on display in the center of their farming estate. Still, 44 players out of 60 purchased beautiful objects, flowers and trees that, apart from their visual appear, only had value as a means to finish the quest. So to finish the quest, you had to buy flowers and trees and whatever, and you would need like 3 flowers to finish the quest, but some players would buy like 10. 27 players out of 60 bought 10 pink roses, for example, even though 3 would be enough. And one player created a rose garden of 52 roses. And that's quite a lot of money, not that much money, actually roses are relatively cheap, but that's absolutely not corresponding to the value that the developer would put into them. Interestingly, players tend to get rid of decorative objects that directly symbolize their participation in quests, even though these objects are beautiful. And actually, it was an interesting discovery because it contradicts the theory of achievement-driven motivation. So there's the achievement. Players definitely are like really involved in the game. They are have been playing for 1 year, 2 years, maybe 3 years, mostly daily. And they achieve something, but they just put it into the shed, and they put what they like on display. So it contradicts the theory of achievement-driven motivation, which was proposed by many scholars, including Mia Consalvo in her study of players and their pets. So it was another kind of motivation. Why do these players play? Generally, they prefer to pursue their own goals. They seem to enjoy the process of play rather than extrinsic rewards. And they would skip the laborious part of the game. They would rather pay in-game money or even really money than work for the same rewards. Anyway, this can also be explained as a very specific form of digital labor, the labor of consumption. But then we have to go to another theoretic framework. We have to go to all this consumption society body of literature and revisit the material from that point. I was just trying to find like a strictly economical explanation, and what I found is that players didn't like to be involved in playbor, but they were okay to pay some money now and then. Besides, I paid attention to a form of playbor specific to free-to-play games, which is inviting you friends and being neighbors in the game. This is kind of the most criticized part. Okay, this is the farm of one of my, of one of the people whom I studied It's kind of very big and beautiful. But okay, performing friendship, this is what is most criticized. We have literature, we have publications on Candy Crush Saga about commodifying friendship. What I came to is that actually commodification of friendship on Facebook is overestimated, at least in the observed case. First, people were adding friends, like adding each other as friends, totally for economic reasons, because they get rewards for that, they can share presents, they can, like really, they become really richer when they have many friends. But then when you observe that like included ethnographical research, which I actually didn't plan, but it just happened. When you simply observe all these people playing the game, there is a lot of personal communication, a lot of personal relationships. They discuss personal matter in the in-game chat. They flirt with each other. They ask about, I don't know, the health of their relatives and whatever. And they, I even saw like there've been some cases of sexual harassment that has been reported in an idyllic farming game. So it's started to seem more like a normal MMORPG than a harmless and exploitative little farming game. Okay, so even though empirical data seem to contradict primary suppositions about time-based value and game rewards, it verifies the existence of playbor in real story in a number of different and sometimes unexpected forms. These forms include communication with other members of the gaming community and also purchasing luxury goods for in the game. Even more, I would argue that simply logging into the game every day is also a form of labor. This is like a very normal thing in free-to-play games, log in every day to get bigger and bigger rewards. So if you just go and log in every day, you get quite a lot of money and other things to be relatively successful and well off on your virtual farm. You get quite a lot of real money, of course not like real money, but hard currency, which can only be obtained by real money or in some very, very difficult quests. So here you can get actually like 15 rubies, and 15 rubies is kind of 20 cents, I think. Oh, no, it's maybe like, sorry, I forgot, it's somewhere around $1 or so of real world value. So basically, you receive unconditional basic income just by logging into the game every day. So you don't even have to work so much, and you don't even have to pay real money for that. So all these studies open new perspectives, I hope, for studies of virtual worlds and economies, as well as for practical game design. And of course, the scope of this study can be expanded into economic studies of free-to-play games in different genres, from Candy Crush to Clash of Clans, whatever. And we not only can provide, and actually I really needed the qualitative research. In the end, what I personally learned from my research is that you can't simply go on with the quantitative research. Because I'm like from the marketing background, so I thought it would explain everything, but I only could explain what's happening in the game when I was starting to observe players directly, what they do and how they communicate. That's what I wanted to tell you. Thank you a lot. Maybe questions?